Hakim, for your presentation. We only have about 10 minutes for questions. So we will take 2 to 3 questions for each speaker, for both the speakers, and then we'll give them the option to reflect on them or answer them. So, questions yourself. Could you please just say your name and your affiliation?
Assalamualaikum. My name is Raheel. I'm from Scotland. Studied in many places and shortly I live in Haldun as well. So my question is to both speakers. As you're both leading in your individual campuses, how can we, or how do you see young Muslim students and future generations overcome these issues that you've detailed of having, because I feel as if we have to get educated, we initially get miseducated, then we get re-educated. Is there any way that we can get educated in the sense of how we should be looking in the world from our Islamic worldview first, and how do you see that turning in the real world really? So in a sense, how do we prevent ourselves from being miseducated and having to re-educate ourselves of the multiplexity of truth and other worldviews?
Yes, this is a very difficult and challenging question. It has multiple dimensions. There is intellectual, academic dimension, and there is also political dimension, because in the modern era, education is used to indoctrinate the masses to the national ideology, and social sciences in particular are used to nation building, to selectively construct a history for a particular nation, and the same thing for like a theology building. So it is not only academic and intellectual endeavor. So there are efforts to start like Islamic education, but most of them failures. Because they think simply hanging Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the entrance of the school becomes an Islamic school, or writing Bismillah in the beginning of the book, the content becomes Islamic. So we are disconnected from our intellectual heritage. So I believe what's needed is to relink ourselves to our intellectual heritage without abandoning the modern discourse, without disconnecting ourselves from it. And this, I believe, could happen through comparative education. This is what we try to apply at Ibn Haldun University, comparative education, because there is an existing discourse which cannot be dismissed, but also we have our own heritage. So a comparative pedagogy, I believe, is the best method. So if student is learning about Marx, Adam Smith, and other, let's say, Western economists, he should also learn about Ibn Khaldun, and the psychology, let's say, if they are learning about behaviorism, etc., Freud, they should learn about Ghazali and other thinkers. But the approach to Islamic studies, as Sh Abdal Hakim also said, should not be historical. Islam is not subject for historical study. We should look at it as something that's implemented today. For instance, like I am founder of Ibn Khaldun Society, and there we call for applied Haldunism. Don't study Ibn Khaldun as a historical subject. Look for applied Haldunism. How can you apply Ibn Khaldun to today's problems? Thank you.
Yes, all of this is a little bit sort of hindsight-oriented, isn't it? What we have in our reality is substantial Muslim communities across the West, who came, or whose parents came, for unexamined and non-Sharia compliant reasons in the great majority of cases. They came to eat kebabs or to flee tyranny or for whatever reason, but without really engaging with the ulama or our tradition or reflecting about what was going to happen to their children when their children were thrown into the bubbling, melting pot of a modern, postmodern Western reality. They never considered that. And now they're traumatized. Their kids are becoming criminalized or radicalized or confused. And normally the ulama would help, but the ulama in the West don't help either, because the ulama say of many Dar al-Ulum contexts, whenever questions of truth, theology, the real challenges of modernity are mentioned, they pick up their mobile phones and get back into their comfort zone. And this is a problem. That what they're providing is not a space, a Ghazalian space, where contemporary challenges can be understood and where young people can be helped to deal with them, but they're creating fortresses to which people can run in order to escape from those contemporary challenges. So if you don't want to ever think about climate change, or gender fluidity, or the singularity, or artificial intelligence, run to those places and they will preoccupy you with hadiths and old fatwas, and you can relax a bit and escape from the reality. The ulama hatched from those institutions may not be very helpful in chaplaincy, emergency, faith-restoring situations, and the difficult frontline, grainy reality that a lot of young Muslims are facing as they go through the Western academy. And that is part of the problem. Intentionality, 40, 50 years ago when people came, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, the first hadith of Islam, in Bukhari, is about what is the reason for your hijrah? Don't ask. And then, when the consequences of that become traumatic for the youth, ulama, whose response is run away from the sources of those traumas and hide in some replica of some overseas 18th, 17th century thing, have a complete, perfect reconstruction of a Moroccan dhikr that makes no acknowledgement at all of where people are at culturally, provide refuges. But that is not really going to solve the problem either, because the mujaddids of the religion are people who are proactive rather than reactive and step up to the front line in these intellectual battles rather than run away and hoping that when they check again the battles will no longer be a problem. So it's kind of everybody's fault, really. But other religious communities are facing the same kind of traumas. It's not just Muslims who are struggling and yelling in the melting pot because everybody's hurting.
Hi, my name is Alan. I'm with the Tar Foundation International. I think my accent gives away my place of origin now. And perhaps my question too. What I've noticed in the U.S. university context is something that hasn't been mentioned here, but the politicization of, I would say, the combination of Arabic, understanding of the Arab world, and the study of Islam, which can often be wrapped up into some terrifying bundle. Terrifying to me, just so you understand. I actually studied contemporary Arab studies at Georgetown back when there was an open war going on in the New Republic between the founding director of the program and the editor of the New Republic, who didn't understand why anything contemporary or Arab should be studied. What's happened now, particularly in the U.S. after 9/11 and I think in other contexts, is the national security framework in which all of the above, and in particular Islam, has been viewed. And I was wondering what you see as some of the challenges as you try to advance. I think when you're always living in reaction and in a negative space and countering attacks on your faith and your identity, I think it's very hard to move forward, or I would assume to move forward in a positive sense. And so I would be interested in your perspective.
I'm being reminded about the time, but so we can collect 2-3 more questions and then we can give the speakers a chance to answer them.
Thanks. It's really interesting to look at you. This is a question for Sh Abdal Hakim with regards to your last answer. Would it be accurate to say that the sort of cultural onslaught that Muslim youth are facing, they're only facing in the West? That I would argue that they're actually facing it elsewhere as well. And therefore, the question of, oh, why did their parents migrate becomes moot, because had they not migrated, sitting in Qatar, for example, they might have faced the same question. So a further clarification there would be good. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you both. So I have a question that relates somewhat to circulations of politics at Cambridge. There was a very vibrant anti-colonized movement here across multiple faculties, politics, sociology, history, etc. And as two educators in two different kinds of Muslim institutions, the Cambridge Muslim College and the Haldun, I wonder if you could reflect on the imaginaries of what Islamic thought can contribute to a decolonized project that speaks beyond just Muslim conditions, but conditions of colonialism writ large.
Any final question?
So I'm Rasim Karim, finally a medic. So I really enjoyed both of your talks. Just a further question to Sh Abdal Hakim's answer as well is because you mentioned that a lot of the religious clergy or imams have kind of failed the youth by just taking them away from all their problems. So where can the youth actually find the solutions to their problems? Because it's just a void.
Thank you.
As Sh Abdal Hakim already mentioned, there is a tendency to historicize Islamic studies. There has been, and recently we see this other strong tendency to secularize, turn Islam into a security issue, or politicize, turn Islam into a political issue rather than religion or theology or morality issue. So it really forgets the essence of Islam, as a religion, but focuses or approaches to it as a security issue or a political international issue. So today, when media needs opinion about Islam, they invite a security expert or an international relations expert, rather than somebody who was like specialist on Islam as a religion. So this is a shift, in paradigm, in approaching to Islam. I had one student, he was writing a PhD thesis on securitizing Islam. So in America, how it turned into a security issue. So if it's a security issue or an international issue, you don't need to know the culture, you don't need to know Arabic, you don't need to read the Quran, you don't need to know the Hadith. All what you need to do is just gather some information from newspapers and internet sites, then you can speak as an expert. But this is a very dangerous thing. It's hijacking, Islamic studies, and Muslim students, they go to universities to do Islamic studies to learn about their religion, but there they find something completely irrelevant, to their initial purpose. They go there to learn about their religion, but what's offered to them has nothing to do with Islam as religion. It's like international relations or political science, a branch of, a sub-branch of political science, interrelations, or anthropology. So it's a big risk, for the Muslim students to go to like a secular modern university to try to learn Islam. Thank you.
Yeah, I should have mentioned the factor of the securitizing of area studies, Middle East studies, which is probably more onerous in US universities than it is in this country, where I think there's been a kind of strong pushback against that. But it's nonetheless recognized by the departments that the largest single potential employer of Arabic graduates in the UK at the moment is GCHQ, MI5, the military, some agencies that may seem even more obscure, and there is a certain pressure for the curricula to adapt, to become more contemporary, more security-oriented, a pressure that I think is largely so far being resisted. But the other side of that is, of course, that the securitizing the discourse around Islam and Muslims has also a strongly inhibiting effect on Muslim freedom of expression. That there's a lot of no platforming, a lot of very anxious institutions that understand or misunderstand their responsibilities under the prevent agenda. And as a result, many Muslims are afraid to go to certain events. It is about Palestine, it is about the invasion of the Iraq, because they don't know whether or not this will involve their registration in what the police now call the pre-criminal space. They're just kind of flagged up because they went to a particular meeting. And this is a very extensive and well-documented problem. The long-term outcome of that is unclear, but it is already the case under anti-terrorism legislation in this country that some poor student at Exeter, if out of curiosity or by mistake, he or she downloads an Al-Qaeda song, for instance, that is now a strict liability offence under English law, which carries a minimum prison sentence of 8 years. It's very, very ferocious and punitive. And the prisons, and I know this since I've worked as an expert witness in terrorism trials, the prisons are filling up with young Muslims who accidentally downloaded stuff as part of a package that was mainly Bollywood film, but it has that in it. And it's a conveyor belt that takes them straight to the criminal justice system. And Clive Stafford Smith and other human rights lawyers have protested about this, but government only wields blunt instruments and really doesn't know what it's looking at. Just as a coda to that, which is kind of not quite funny, but perhaps appropriate for Halloween. In one case that I was dealing with, this boy had been arrested, and one of the arguments that the police was using was that he downloaded a book called Al-Qaeda, which was in Arabic. So they spend a lot of money getting some amused Lebanese translator to do it into English so they can see what Al-Qaeda is about. And it's a 300-page book on Arabic grammar. That is the extent of the shocking ignorance that the establishment is deploying in order to deal with often quite subtle issues. And it does have a very strong inhibiting influence on Muslims. So they're afraid the state is watching. We know that it's watching. We saw those GCHQ manuals that were released by some whistleblower. And of course, this is a serious concern, not just for Muslims, but for people committed to freedom of expression, to the values of a liberal society generally. So, yeah, it is of concern. May it soon be dispelled. The young lady's comment about this isn't just about alienation following migration, but generally to do with people being impacted by modernity. I think diaspora Muslims, minority Muslims, and Muslims in majority countries experience this in a different way. Here, at least, we have the possibility of some kind of religious freedom, whereas in most Muslim countries now, religious discourse, again for security reasons, is completely governmentalized. Only the state mufti can have a view on something. The khutbahs, the sermons, are completely written by the state, and nobody is allowed to meet in the mosque to hear anything else. And it's a kind of shutdown in an increasing number of Muslim countries, which makes it harder for young people to know what the answers are, because the state discourse tends to be sort of ironic, fluffy, apolitical, neutral, and increasingly frustrating for the young. But nonetheless, I think that young people who are brought up in British schools or French schools face this secular challenge rather more acutely than they do in Muslim countries. You won't find in a school in Qatar, for instance, the obligatory teaching of non-binary sexuality to 4-year-olds in the schools. They're not there yet, but here it seems to be a raw and a traumatic issue. But yeah, it's not just about migration, you're right. Decolonization is important. I think many Muslims have been inhibited from it because it tends to assume that the decolonized Muslim society or third world society or other society nonetheless has to be striving towards a particular kind of liberal set of social outcomes. So very often there are gender beliefs or beliefs about sexual identity or forms of social organization that conservative Muslims may not be comfortable with, that act as an inhibitor on them joining those movements, and may even arouse the suspicion that it's political decolonization But there's still cultural colonization as well, because the basic assumptions about gender and sexual identity, which are of largely Western inspiration, are still there and being wished on those societies. Where can these turn for solutions? Well, your local Malvi Sahib, who's been to Darul Uloom, can't tell you about the singularity. But, I mean, our tiny experiment here in Cambridge Muslim College, is trying to take Darul Uloom graduates and give them the necessary tools that allow them to see that the traditional paradigms of the usul can create an ijtihad which can give people actually better answers than secularity can give. Because secularity at the moment is based on the deconstruction of things. It's not based on truth. If you have access to truth, you are in a stronger position to argue for the public good, for public morality, for a higher purpose for human beings. Religious faith has positive health outcomes, mental health outcomes, physical health outcomes. It's a very strong position to be from, but unfortunately, most of the Malvi Sahibs and the ulama who are at the moment active in Western context haven't begun to see the richness of their tradition and the way in which it can become proactive and provide a set of solutions to wider society, rather than just a kind of bunker in which to be ethnically different. They haven't got there yet. But my confidence, working with a lot of young people who've been through the Darul Uloom and other madrasa systems, is that many of them really want to make a difference. They want the Darul Uloom, Dars in Islamic curriculum to be a basis for offering a therapy to the world and society, rather than just a justification for staying apart and hiding. In other words, a religion of da'wah, rather than a religion of running away. So generally, if you work with those young people, there's a lot of talent and capacity with them, and I'm cautiously optimistic that the next generation will be more relevant, inshallah.
صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه